In this episode of Unmute the Voices, I speak with violinist Christian Howes. And oh my gosh, this is a interview you do not want to miss. He joins me right here in the studio where we talk about his career and his life, the transformation that he experienced when he was in prison, and what he has learned from that experience that has helped him become a prolific, very sought after musician and teacher. That's right now, here on Unmute the Voices. Chris, welcome to Unmute the Voices. How are you, man?
I'm great. Thank you, sir.
I'm so glad you're here. And don't call me sir.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Morris.
Oh my God. Really? Are we doing that right now? I feel like I kind of need to bow to you in a way because you're like a legend, you know, in classical music. You are such a versatile performer. You play all different types of music. You have a huge following on social media. You are an influencer for good. You are a champion of music education. You are a legend in so many people's eyes, including mine. And so many people follow you and just love you and respect you from all different walks of life, all different educational backgrounds, all different racial and backgrounds and ethnicities. And I guess I want to know first is, how did you bring all of these people from such diverse backgrounds together, really under the landscape of classical music? Like, how did you do that?
Wow. Thank you. And the feeling's mutual. I mean, I have so much respect for everything you're doing and for you personally, and grateful to consider you a friend. And I don't have a good answer for that question off the top of my head, to be honest. But I have been pushing hard for a long time to promote, the music and the teaching, and it is very diverse. I guess the music that I do, I don't play all kinds of music, but I play lots of kinds of music, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that I was early on doing, like in 1997, I was promoting playing jazz and other styles of music, and I have a classical pedigree. So, but in the beginning in 1997, for me anyway, it was, I felt like I was just, like castaway, definitely. Like the classical folks didn't get what I was doing, and the jazz folks didn't get what I was doing because I was a violin player. So I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. But I just kept kind of pushing on it and just kept going. So I think it's probably just been longevity, maybe, that just, and just push, so that there have been some people, hopefully, that have gravitated to me from different communities. I hope. I guess.
And you're saying you're pushing, and you've never stopped.
Yeah, since 1996, for sure. Yeah, I was, and that was like, and if we talk about, like for young musicians, if young musicians out there are asking about like developing their career, like I was definitely in a place of like, in part like fear and the urgency of like, I don't, just survival. And I was like, so I went out and I just offered myself everywhere. I was just like, who needs a violin player? Like, who needs this? Who needs that? And I've just been hustling like that really hard for a long time, and it's taken different forms.
Where does that come from? Because there's a certain amount of guts that one has to have, right?
Absolutely. I think that, it's always like a question of like, how much urgency do you have versus how much fear you have, and which one wins. It's like I've heard some people say, like, is your mission does your mission weigh heavier than your fear of doing it? So it's like every time I put out a video, every time I make a phone call, every time I reach out and offer to be of service in whatever way, offer my ideas, there's always a fear around it. And that's natural, I think, for a lot of people, unless you're like just a narcissist or something, you know, because we're raised to be like polite and humble and stuff. And so we're afraid of being rejected and all that. But I was just like, yeah, that urgency, you know, it's like the building is burning down, you know, or like if you love somebody and like a truck is on top of them, you're going to find the strength to move that truck, you know. So I think I felt a lot of urgency. And,
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. You talked about fear. Like, what does Christian house fear? Because I look at you kind of like Superman, you know, Violin. Like, and I'm sure there are going to be people who are watching this who are going to be like, dude, that dude doesn't fear anything.
Right. You know, well, that's interesting. Yeah, right. And that's a thing that we, you know, a lot of us, I think, feel tempted, or, you know, or I would be tempted to say, like, yeah, I don't fear anything, you know, but I think the honest truth is, no, fear is a part of life, you know. I mean, certainly for me. And I think there's a lot of things we're afraid to do, and then we have to summon some kind of way to, you know, in spite of that fear, to try to do it. Even tonight, I mean, I'm playing this classical concert. I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid of the concert, but I'm trying to manage that fear, you know. And but you know, I mean, for me in 1996, you know, I had just walked out of prison after spending 4 years, my 21st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th birthdays in prison in Ohio, and I was on probation, serving a 6 to 25 year sentence, which meant they could take me back anytime. So that was a specific fear, like 4 years living in fear every day in prison. And then after that, the fear of, I don't want to go back. And just having felt like that it was a part of my nervous system at that point to just constantly be in fear. I mean, if I'm being totally honest.
Yeah. No, please lie to me. What did you, since you brought that up, I have to ask, like, I have two questions. One is, what did you learn from that experience during that time? And then secondly, how did that experience help you evolve as an artist?
And, you know, and I don't want to get into, well, I just don't want to take up too much time, but I'm happy to talk about any of it, you know, with you. But there's a lot of things I learned. Like, I learned a lot about what is it, like the questions that I was asking about what does it mean to be a man? Because I was 20 when I went into prison. So that's a time when you're like, okay, am I a boy? Am I a man? And then like, well, what does it mean to be a man? So I learned a lot of questions about that. I don't know that I even answered them all. And I think actually in prison, there's like, you know, there's the code of the convict, and that's one version of what it means to be a man. And actually that is a code that prescribes to get respect at all costs, including violence. And violence, you know, ultimately is violence to oneself. So if a man is defined by, I'm going to do whatever is required to get my propers, then this is ultimately, it means the biggest man is a man who's willing to give up his life. Because doing whatever it takes, you know, that's the ultimate thing. That's violent. And you're either going to, you know, and then you're going to end up getting locked up for life. You know what I mean? That's real in prison, like every day. Like that is real. And so what's the opposite of that? Well, it's like, are you a pacifist? Like, how do you turn away from violence in a way that doesn't have worse consequences for you, you know? And that actually made me empathize with, and just to some degree, it made me empathize with like, feeling like I can understand what it's like to be a woman in the world. When if, you know, because in prison, like, you know, I felt like I was a target, you know? And so how do you respond to that? And it just made me think like, I guess women are like, you know, this must be, maybe there's something in common that women feel around this. And so I learned about manhood, but I also studied philosophy and the humanities because I was able to have Pell Grants. If there was one advocacy I would do around prison, it would be make Pell Grants available to convicts, because that was really big. The fact that I could go to college, that was huge. And I took hundreds of hours of humanities classes, so literature, American studies, humanities, psychology, philosophy, and stuff like that. But the education that I was getting on that was paralleled by the equally deep, if not deeper, education from walking on the yard with older men. Yeah, and learning from their perspective. And those, the men that I knew in prison, by virtue of being a musician, by virtue of, quote unquote, having game, it was like that's what gave me an entree to have, honest conversations, have mentors, have friends, people that wanted my help with music, but then they were really giving me a lot more help as far as talking about just life and manhood. Mm-hmm. And they had a very different background than me, but they had a lot of wisdom.
Wow.
And so that education was really important too. So manhood, learning about life and the humanities, and also I learned a lot about music in prison too.
What sort of things did you learn about music while being in prison? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, so, I was a classical violinist from the time I was 5 years old, and I was very serious, like elite, quote unquote, elite classical violinist, award winning, all that stuff, And when I went into prison and I would play music with, first of all, I was in this band called the Warden's Band at Ross Correctional. There was a warden, Ronald Edwards was a warden, a black man who accessed lots of state funding to create this band, and it was a rehabilitation program. And so we had a band room, and there was like 9 convicts, and we played music. There was 2 white musicians in the band. I was one of them. All the other musicians were black. We played Mary J. Blige, Prince, Levert, George Clinton, and on and on and on. Music from the 70s and the 80s.
Levert, I haven't heard that group name.
Cleveland, Ohio, you know what I'm saying? So, I mean,
wow.
and the list goes on and on. Like, we played the Electric Slide, that was popular back then. That's when it was, 92.
Wow.
And we would rehearse every day. And, but then also I would play on the yard, just with this guy named Ali, was a Muslim guy who played like Wes Montgomery style guitar, and he taught me licks on the yard, and he'd just sit and we'd just play. And so what I realized is, I was an elite classical musician, but what I realized was like I could not function as a musician in this other world of Black American music, blues, R&B, and I would play in church every Sunday. And when I play in church, it was like, a really deep experience. And for me, I don't necessarily consider myself religious, but I would definitely say it was, in spite of that, it was a spiritual experience. There's just something, it's like really powerful. And so I realized that there was so much depth in this music, and I didn't know anything about any of it. I was the most ignorant person in the room. My first day when the warden brought me in to introduce me to the band, he was asked me to show, here's a violin. He got a violin. He got a MIDI violin for me.
Wow.
A Zeta violin. He got it through this, and I was able to get my acoustic violin. And he was like, play for them. And so I played Paganini. And, and I think the guys were impressed, but I think they were also like, yeah, but you can't do any of this. So for the first 3 or 4 months I was playing in the Warden's Band, they told me, you're not playing any violin. You're playing a cowbell, and you're doing a couple background vocals, and you're doing a 2-step, and you need to learn to do a 2-step. I practiced that 2-step every day for months.
Wow.
They said, that's all you're going to do. You're going to do a 2-step and hit a cowbell.
So did you have to, earn your respect as a musician / violinist while being with the band?
Definitely.
In order to play with the band?
Well, I was in the band. and nobody could do anything about it. The warden
Right.
put me there. It was like there's nine of us. That was like literally like my job, actually.
Yeah, but how did you evolve or
Yeah, the
get
person-
promoted from cowbell
Oh yeah, right, exactly.
to violin,
Yeah,
right?
it was
I'm
very-
really curious about this now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, because the keyboardist, he had one of these sequencers. They had just come out with sequencers. These big, bulky keyboards, and he was sequencing everything. He would like have all the parts in the keyboard. And he wanted me to play the parts on the violin. I was like, I could play that flute with some harmonics in that Prince song, you know?
Yeah.
Or I can't even remember what the Prince song was, but there was like a flute. I was like, I'm playing it. He's like, you're not playing it. It's in the sequence. It was like, you know. And there was different personal dynamics with different members of the band. I would go with the drummer, Don Brown, who was from Akron, and we were just sitting there and just shed. He'd be playing swing feel, and I'd be playing and just trying to learn from him and stuff like that. And so there was people that I had great friendships with, but also people I had a lot of tension with. They were older, and they were like, you know, you're not, you know, it was like a, I don't know.
Hierarchical kind of thing
I guess,
in
yeah.
the band?
Yeah, there was a hierarchy in the band. And I was young. I was the youngest person, and I was white. And so, you know, there was a whole different thing. But I learned a lot about music. I realized, like, there's so much in music to learn. And as a classical musician, I never got taught any of it. And also that this music is deep. Like, black music is deep. And that was a very parallel experience to like, and humbling, a very parallel to walking on the yard and asking, you know, guys to tell me, you know, just talking about life, talking about their experience, talking about how to navigate prison, which was maybe in some people might have said it was like navigating the street. And I was like realizing like that I'd, you know, seen the world, I'd grown up seeing the world through a certain lens, including music, you know, including education. So this idea of education, that education happens in ivory tower, in school, you know, education is very much delivered through a lens. It's a narrow lens of education. What is truth? What is knowledge? You know, these are things that we define through a lot of constructs. You know, through our lens as people. And I was just very humbled by that, and I got a deep education from being a part of a different community. You know, I mean, in prison, I was a minority. You know, it was probably statistically 65% black. And then, but on top of that, because I played music, I didn't have to segregate among whites. Which, you know, a lot of times in prisons, like, everybody's segregated. But, you know, I played music with black musicians every day. So it was like I kind of had friends. Like, I was allowed a pass. So I was really a part of a community.
I see. How have you been able to bring what you've learned in terms of community and in terms of understanding different styles of music and different approaches to creating music to your career now?
Well, that's been my whole career. And it was really in that church on Sunday that it was like, oh, I have a different vision now for what I want my life as an artist to be. I knew that in prison.
So you knew when you got out of prison, you were going to play different styles of music and not just center in on classical.
I knew 100% I wanted to be a jazz violinist. And that genesis was from being in prison. It was from being in church and feeling that feeling of like, holy crap, this is a palpable thing. Like the energy that I'm feeling in this church right now. And this might sound a little self-indulgent, you know, but it was like, I felt like in that church service, I felt like people were like, you know, kind of recognizing that I was speaking to them in their own language.
Wow. What would you say to someone who is trying to have kind of this epiphany that you had at 24 years of age, you know? What would you say to that person who is looking for that breakthrough, who's looking for or trying to figure out what they want to do with their life, who might be a classical musician or might be in the arts, right? That doesn't go to prison, right?
Yeah.
You had this, obviously, this very traumatic experience that wound up really shaping you and creating kind of a compass for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah.
In terms of your career. But most people will never have that type of experience. They might have something else.
Right.
But what would you say to that person who is looking or searching or trying to figure out what their next move is?
I mean, I feel like that's kind of like an entrepreneurship conversation. And so, I would say you need to find that urgency. For me, it was that fear. It was a fear-based urgency. Now, urgency doesn't have to come from fear. It could come from like a positive, like a desire to contribute, a desire to make change, a desire to receive. It could come from a lot of things. But I would say every day you have a choice, like, between your mission and your fear. If you don't have a mission or a vision, then start by create a vision. Then put a goal. And your vision, I think, is like, what do I want my life to look like? What do I want to feel? Who do I want it to be with? What's the contribution I want to make to the world, and what do I want to receive? And just answer those questions, and then say, okay, well, what's a goal that can kind of be in line with that? Do I need $50,000 a year to do that? Do I want to be working 20 hours a week and have 10 hours a week to do this? And then I would say the single most important thing that I believe will affect your odds of succeeding if you work for yourself as an artist or in any capacity is this: the willingness and ability to offer your services consistently and appropriately to the right people over time. Period. The end.
How do you know who those right people are?
I'm not sure if I have an answer to that, but you just start by just trying anybody, and then you get feedback. You have to respond to feedback, and you have to find trends of feedback.
Right, but what about those people who are shy or who are nervous or, frankly, might not be able to take that feedback? How do you respond to that?
Yeah.
Right? And in classical music, there's a lot of those people, right?
Yeah. So I have a theory that, like, our violin practice, our business, our relationships, that these are all practices that are ultimately the practice of becoming a better friend to ourselves. And part of that practice of becoming a better friend to ourselves is being able to deal with receiving that feedback. Like, I've taken feedback from you that was hard for me to hear.
No.
But then...
Really?
Of course. Yeah, of course. What do you mean? No, come on, man. We keep, I think, at least sometimes you keep it real with me, right?
I keep it real.
And so then, it's scary to get that feedback sometimes from people because we're doubting whether we're worthy. We're doubting whether they're going to reject us, and all this. But this is the work we have to do.
Yeah.
And I just want to say for the record that, like, I feel like, that's why I said I think it's maybe it could sound a little self-indulgent the way I talk about my experience in prison, but that was an awakening for me. But I also have realized, in the last few years that I'm not done waking up. Like, there's so much more work and education that I need.
I really appreciate you saying that there's a lot more work that you have to do. This show, this platform is Unmute the Voices, is created to showcase and celebrate the excellence of Black classical musicians and people of color whose voices have been muted or have not been recognized. What would you say to other white people in classical music specifically who need to be, woken up? What sort of words can you give to them on how they can wake up to a lot of the social issues and disparities that happen in our field?
Yeah. And it goes to this feedback too. It's like, have the willingness to have conversations, honest conversations with people outside of the white community, and be open to get that feedback. In a place where you feel safe, or where you feel, loved or that's been created for you to be educated, but be able to just start processing some of it. And I was really moved by the conversation you had with the CEO of this radio station. And she came on and said something to the effect of, I acknowledge that I am a racist. And I thought that was very powerful, but I think for a lot of white people, it's very hard for us to stomach that, to process that, to understand what it means, to be able to, so I think there might be softer ways that we could do it, that we feel just to open the possibility up, to say like, okay, I've been influenced. My whole life I have been influenced by racist ideas. I've been influenced, or however you want to say it. Even if you don't want to say it, call it race. It's like to acknowledge that like my lens is colored. And I think that's just really hard for it's still really hard for a lot of white people to do that.
Why is that hard?
I think because like if we, if I acknowledge that I've been influenced by racism, then it's like I'm opening myself up to criticism that I'm bad, that I'm a bad person. I mean, that's just one thing that comes up to me. I'm not really sure, but I think, it's like we can become very defensive when we feel like, we can just become very defensive. It's like, I'm bad and wrong. And it's like, so, but that's the work that I think we have to do is knowing, like, that if I can have a conversation with you and be like, yes, I acknowledge I need more education. I acknowledge I've been affected by these ways. It's like everyone has, but to know that this is actually a path forward for me to love myself and actually to receive more love and connect more deeply with people. To even think that it's possible that maybe I'm going to connect more deeply with you if I'm honest about these things rather than trying to be defensive about them. What do you think?
No, I think you're definitely on to that. I think that a lot of times white people in classical music specifically, because of the show, don't want to lose their privilege. They don't want to lose their privilege. They don't want to give that thing up, or they feel like they're giving something up, right? By me opening the door for a person of color means I might lose my job.
Yeah, sure.
I might lose my social status or my position that I worked so hard for by opening the door for someone who I know is more competent, who I know is more talented, who I know deserves to be there. But I'm not going to let that go because I don't have to. Right? So when we're looking at race and class and privilege within classical music, it's all stemmed in that, right? In white supremacy, right? And so having shows like this, having guests like you who can come on and speak about this is really the purpose of what we're doing here at the station, to combat racism, to really open the door for conversation, and finally to really exude what it means to be inclusive of all people. I think there's real power in us being able to acknowledge and work together to move forward. I'm curious for you, Chris, you work a lot in music education and you're a very passionate teacher. You're a fantastic teacher, and you have people from all different walks of life and various musical styles who work with you. I'm curious, what sort of advice can you give to a teacher who wants to do outreach, wants to diversify their repertoire, wants to make a difference in their community, but they're scared?
Yeah.
They're living in the suburbs and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to relate to other people from other backgrounds or ethnicities. What sort of advice can you give to that teacher who is curious, wants to do more, but is afraid?
Yeah, I mean, going back to like, your vision or your mission versus your fear, I would say, cross the train tracks, go to a different coffee shop, try to have a conversation with somebody. I'd be a little facetious, but I mean, it's like just try to have a couple more conversations with people wherever you can. There's got to be some research you can do. There are at least, I think, more resources in communities or even online where you can engage with conversations.
Right.
And hopefully in a space where like it's made for you as a white person to ask questions. And like, you know what I mean? It's like, I love this Facebook group. I think it's called Decolonize the Music Room. Decolonizing the Music Room is a great space like that. It's kind of similar to Unmute the Voices. Like it's curating ideas, by people who are authorities on the subject, and I think, try to expand your social net and just a little bit, and have a conversation with an artist or with an educator, maybe where music is happening in different spaces, and in different communities. Like, for example, if you're trying to find people that are doing music in the Black community, maybe reach out to some Black churches and go to a Black church, because you will be welcome. Chances are at a Black church, I mean, that's a safe space, right? It's a church. And that's a place to tap into some culture, into some relationships and some music, and talk to people in the band, talk to the fine arts supervisor and be like, I'm just trying to dip a toe into the water. Like, what do you recommend? Like, is there anybody I can connect with that can come in and do a workshop or something? Start to make relationships. I don't know. Does that?
No, that totally answers my question. And I would also say, and I'm going to look right directly into the camera and say this, that one thing you can do is also check out Chris Howe's website. He's all over YouTube, and you can totally play along with him where you can learn different styles. And the community is completely diverse. So that's another way that you can connect with people from all different walks of life, all different styles of music, is by connecting with Chris on YouTube. So, Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Quinton.
This was great.
I appreciate you.
Appreciate you too. You're amazing, and much love to you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Great. And thank you as well for watching this episode of Unmute the Voices. Dr. Quinton Morris, enjoy your day.